You're now
StrayAllDay.com.
tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of wait for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies and techniques underneath the umbrella of one unified philosophy that's called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is the persistence that works. I told you this topic was coming. Before we get into it, let me remind you of two things. First, my daily and Monday motivation text message guaranteed to have you focus, sharp, and on point, start your day and your week, respectively. Once we start sending this message again, you'll be getting it straight to your phone. All you got to do is be part of my text community. My number is 305-384-6894. Once we start sending again, you'll be alerted, you'll get a text, and then it'll go from there. Just make sure you text me so you're in the community, so you are not outside of the circle when the festivities begin. Secondly, Work on Your Game University. That's the place where I do all my coaching. You want to work with me directly. You would like to have us help you work on getting your mindset in the right order, have a clear laid out strategy and a game plan for what you're going to do moving forward, a system so that your strategy can work over and over again, and the accountability to make sure that everything is being done the way it's supposed to be being done and implemented properly, accurately, and consistently. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. That link's down below in the description to this episode, wherever you are consuming this, and we will take things from there. Again, that's workonyourgameuniversity.com. Now, today's topic, I told you that this one was coming. This is about persistence that works, when you should use persistence, and in a way that it actually makes sense, as opposed to just blindly persisting just because maybe you thought that's what you were supposed to do. It is not what you're supposed to do. But between yesterday and today's episodes, I'm going to clear all of that up for you. So now that we talked about when persistence may not always be the smartest thing to do, now we're going to talk about when it does work and when it is a smart thing to do. Because persistence is smart when you use it the right way, for the right reasons, and in the right places. So let's talk about what those are and what those right ways, right places, and right reasons are. Point number one. Topic, once again, is the persistence that works. Iterating via the scientific method. What is the scientific method? Scientific method is a process that we use. Let me give you the definition of the scientific method instead of me trying to give you a layman's way of explaining it. I'll give you the definition. It is a method or procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century, consisting in systematic observation, measurement, and experiment, and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. So the part that matters starts with the consisting. Systemic observation, measurement, and experiment, and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. That is what the scientific method is. You should be iterating. That just means making adjustments based on your observations using the scientific method. The important aspect of it that I want to point out here, you should understand all of it, but the important aspect that I want to point out is having a control. A control is what is the baseline that you've already established, and how can we improve on the baseline? How can we make things better than where they already are? That's what a control is. And when you know what you're trying to achieve, meaning I'm trying to beat the baseline, I'm trying to beat the control, when you have that clear outcome, clear goals, and you have clear ways of measuring whether or not you are beating it or not beating it, and clear benchmarks, then it makes perfect sense to persist, because you always have something against which to measure your efforts and to measure your outputs. You need something to measure your efforts and outputs against. And if you don't have that, then it doesn't quite make sense to persist, because we don't know why we're persistent. We don't know where we're trying to go because we have nothing to measure against. So if you have nothing to measure your efforts and outputs against, then again, you may be wading into dangerous deep water that you can't see into. You don't know what's down there by continuing to persist, because you will never know when to stop. And this is the issue that a lot of people have. A lot of people begin doing things as a means to an end and continue doing the means as if they are the ends, because you were never measuring. Therefore, you don't know when you've reached the target. What's the next thing? Is there a next step? Do we stop here? Do we keep going? You don't know, because we have nothing to measure by. All right, so this is compounded by the reality of being a stubborn, hard-headed, bull-headed individual, person who likes to go your own way, march to the beat of your own drummer. Many entrepreneurs fit this description. So entrepreneurs, be very careful of this, because you are less apt to listen to people other than yourself. So you need to be very careful if you are this type of person, because your very nature could be the thing that is most dangerous to you if you don't measure, you don't have anything to benchmark your efforts against, and you're the type of person who's not really the one who's going to just say, you know what, this is not working. Let me go get some information or some insight or some help from someone outside of myself. Not everybody is willing to do that. Not everybody is willing to take that step. And this is the reason why many people end up grinding blindly, persisting with no real baseline or no real idea of what they're doing, why they're doing it, or where they're going with it, simply because they never pick their heads up for air and find out, okay, is this actually making sense what I'm doing? Make sure you're not that person. Point number 2, today's topic once again is the persistence that works. Number 2, you must measure and count. Measure and count, meaning you are not eyeballing your outcomes. When I say measure and counting, I mean this literally. So what are you measuring? What numbers are you looking at? How can you measure your results of thing A to the results of thing B and understand what the difference is between the two? You must know the difference between A and B. Eyeballing is when you are going off of feel, energy, and gut instinct to make decisions that should be based off of logic, measurement, and counting. Make sure you're not eyeballing when you should be measuring. I remember, for example, I was years ago, my grandmother, she used to make, when I was a child, she used to make bread pudding. And I think most of you know what bread pudding is. If you don't, next time you go to a restaurant, see if they have it on the menu, try it. But I liked the bread pudding that my grandmother used to make. And I didn't have it she used to make it like we would go to my grandmother's house in Philadelphia, where I'm from, when I was a child. And then when I was in college, I remember my sophomore year of college, I was speaking to my grandmother on the phone, and I told her that I wanted her to make some bread pudding. Actually, I didn't tell her I wanted to make it. I told her that I wanted her to give me the recipe for some bread pudding because I wanted some and I was going to make it myself at college. And she said, well, I can't give you the recipe because I don't have a recipe. And she said she basically knows how to eyeball the bread pudding. So she could not prescribe to me how to make it because everything she did, the measuring and all that stuff, she would just do it by knowledge in her head. And this is how a lot of any of you have someone grandmother age or older who knows how to cook. A lot of things they cook, they don't measure. They don't use measuring cups or read recipes. They just know the stuff. It's just in their heads. So I couldn't make the bread pudding. But good news is, the good ending to that story is that she made some bread pudding at her home. And then next time that I was home from college, I just got that bread pudding and I took it back to the college campus with me. The whole point is, because she wasn't measuring and counting how she made it, she could not transfer the knowledge to me. And that's part of what I'm talking about here, but it's bigger than that. You just have to be able to measure your results. If you can't measure your results, then we don't know whether result A or result B is actually the one that we want because we're not measuring. All right, how can we can't even compare them because we don't know what we got. So you got to know what you got. Don't go off of just feel, energy, and gut instinct. In other words, you are not going to be running your business or making decisions about your career like my grandmother made her bread pudding. All right, and your business and career are more important than that bread pudding. Okay, so if you're going to persist on something, you need some sort of measuring tool that lets you know what is working versus what is not working, and you need a standard for when you continue versus when you will stop. All right, does this make sense? Does it not? If you don't have this, again, you are risking using your precious resources that, again, you will not be able to get back if you don't have a measurement tool. So make sure there's a measurement tool in place for what you are doing. For example, when I was playing basketball, or another example, there were players I knew who would always track like all of their shots. One of my guys, Jay Jameson, who I know from up in Philly, outside of Philly, he played college ball at Temple, and he played high school ball at, I forget what school he played at. But anyway, Jay was a really good player, really good outside shooter. And he told me that he would always track like every specific outcome of the workouts that he had done all the way back through like junior high school. So he had books and books and books of all these workouts that he had done. And I remember one of the times I was talking to Jay, he was asking me about the programs and stuff that I had made for basketball players that I was selling online. He had a lot of programs that he had mapped out with pen and paper on books, and he was showing them to me. When I seen him in Philly, he was showing me all the books, all the workouts that he had, and all this stuff, and all the drills and things that he could teach players. And I was advising him, and really strongly advising, that he get this stuff digitized and start putting it out and actually selling it, because it's a huge business opportunity, especially for someone like him. Because unlike me, Jay was actually a basketball trainer. He was actually training players in his facility. I remember going to his facility outside of Philly many times back in 2006, 2007. I used to work out with Jay, playing leagues that he was in and all that stuff. And he had a bunch of players. He had a big, what do they call it? A roster of clients who he was training to play basketball. And he already had a built-in audience of people who would have bought his stuff, whereas my audience was more on the internet. His was people he actually knew in person. And I don't know if he ever actually did it. I got to talk to Jay, find out if he did it. But anyway, the point is, he had for years tracked every single shot he had taken in workouts, how many he had made and how many he had missed. This is going back to like junior high. Jay is, I believe, he's probably a couple years. He might be a couple years older than me, maybe 1 or 2 years older than me. So this guy had like 25, 30 years of workouts tracked on paper. So you want to talk about measuring and counting? And that was more than I did. When I would work out, I didn't measure and count that way. I measured and counted in a different way. He did it in a way that I didn't normally do it. But his way is extreme measuring and counting. And it's not even extreme, actually. It's detailed is the better word to use. And let me tell you something else about Jay. He was a damn good shooter. And you know why? Well, one of the reasons is he had skill. Another reason is he worked on his game. Another reason is because he was measuring his results. He was measuring his practice. He was measuring his improvements or lack of improvement. So he knew exactly how well he was doing in 2001 versus how he did in 2002. Because he could just look at the numbers for each one and know exactly where he was at, exactly what he was doing, what was working, what wasn't working, and why. He knew exactly where he was. Another example is Tim Ferriss, who's the author of the 4-Hour series books, most popularly the 4-Hour Work Week. And Tim is a guy who has described himself as a human guinea pig, meaning he would come up with experiments of things that might work, again, scientific method, hypotheses, and then he would test the hypotheses on himself. He would use himself as the test person for these things. And then when he found the things that worked, he would explain them, and then he put them on his blog and eventually into his books. And that's one of the reasons why he became as famous as he became, because the stuff that he would share were the experiments that worked. So he had tested everything, told people what didn't work, and then he would tell you what did work. I remember a few things I got from Tim. He talked about how in his book, The 4-Hour Body, he did an experiment to find out if it was possible a human being could just go through their lives without 8 hours of sleep every night, because he wanted to hack sleeping. All right, can we hack the concept of sleeping and not sleep so much? So the experiment he was going to try was if a person could just take a series of like 15-minute naps every 2 hours or something like that. So you ended up getting a total of like 2 to 3 hours of sleep, something like that, over the course of a day. But you would just take 15-minute naps every couple of hours. And he tracked this. He would measure it like to the dot, take the naps and only go exactly 15 minutes and get up and keep going. He did this like precisely. And he said he tried it, but then at one point, at probably about the second or third day in, he was getting such violent hallucinations from not sleeping, not getting a full amount of sleep, that he had to kill the experiment and concluded that you cannot hack sleeping, that you do have to actually sleep. So unfortunately, for any of you who thought maybe you could get away with not sleeping because you want to work harder and put more time in, it's probably not possible, but you are welcome to try. Read Tim's book and see if the experiment works for you. Another thing I got from him was when I was playing ball, also from his book, The 4-Hour Body, he talked about how he wanted to find out if you could get into really good physical shape, strength-wise, without having to spend hours in the gym. And he found some Olympic training coaches and found out what they had their athletes do, and athletes from different sports. He basically condensed it down to 3 specific exercises that if somebody could do in the gym that would get them to really, really good strength, about 80-20 principle strength. So 80% of the strength you needed from 20% of the efforts. And it was 3 exercises. It was this thing called the torture twist, which is basically you laying on a flat bench or a decline bench with a 45-pound weight plate and just twisting to the left, twisting to the right, and holding it for a few seconds. That was one of the exercises. And the other 2 are ones that everybody knows about, the squat and the deadlift. No, was it the squat? It was either the squat or deadlift. You could pick one. And then the other was the bench press. So it was the bench press for the upper body, targeting the upper body. And then it was either squat or the deadlift for the lower body and lower body / full body. If any of you who's ever squatted or deadlift, you know it's a full body exercise, but it focuses on the legs. And then you had the twist, which was for the core. And if you just did those 3 exercises, you could pretty much spend 2 hours a week in the gym and get in really good physical shape. And I started using it, and it literally worked. I still pretty much use that to this day. I mean, I still do sport specific things, but if I was just lifting weights, I could get in and out of the gym in 20 minutes every day, just following what he was doing. And I swapped out I would do some plate exercises for the core, bench press, pull-ups, and deadlift. That's all I would do. So I added pull-ups since I like doing pull-ups. Whole point being, Tim Ferriss was a guy who measured everything. And because he measured so much, he got very specific results, and therefore he could be an expert at telling other people how they could get results. and his 4-hour work week body was a huge influence on me when it came to entrepreneurship, when it came to my business, when it came to the first products I created as an entrepreneur. Because again, he had measured these things and he knew exactly what worked and what didn't. And you could basically follow him as a guide through his blog posts and through his books. And Tim is still out there, by the way, for those you don't know. That out the way, let's move on to point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is the persistence that does work. Number 3, clarity of process. This goes right along with what we talked about in points number 1 and number 2. When you're using the scientific method, those of you who are not familiar with it, scientific method is a process in and of itself. So if you're following the scientific method, there is literally a process. There are literally steps. I believe there's 7 steps to the scientific method. You can Google it and find out what the 7 steps are. But that is a process. And when you have a process, then you have clarity automatically. And when you're measuring, and you should be measuring, if you're using the scientific method, you have to measure because the method is designed to measure things. Then number 3 happens naturally, clarity of process. This is a natural byproduct of following point number 1 and point number 2 as you get point number 3. See, the steps of what you're doing need to be clearly laid out in such a way that anybody can look at it and understand what you're doing, the when, where, why, and how of it. And if you don't have this, then you should be very careful about persisting on anything because we keep coming back to the same point. Your used resources cannot be recouped. So you don't want to be using resources not knowing how you're going to get the ROI from them. So if you don't have clarity of process on the thing that you do, tap into a process of someone who has already created one, who does have a process. And again, this is worth the investment if you consider yourself to be a serious professional in anything you do, from sports to entrepreneurship to corporate to education, anywhere in between. You must tap into a process and or create one of your own. I just told you a person whose processes I tapped into for many years, Tim Ferriss. I tapped into his processes because I knew he had done the work. I knew he had done the experiments. I read all his books. I read all his blogs. I listened to his podcast. I knew that this guy had known his stuff, and I knew he had done more experimenting than I had done. So all I did was submit myself to what he had already figured out and do the short, easy way rather than do it the hard way of trying to figure it out by myself. And all of you need to do that the same way. I'm not saying you need to listen to Tim Ferriss. I'm saying you need to find a person who knows what you need to know and follow what they tell you to do. Simple as that. Point number 4. Today's topic, once again, is the persistence that works. Number 4. All of this leads to one thing: accurate thinking. Accurate thinking. Let me say that again. Let me back up. Persistence without accurate thinking is better known as foolishness. You are being persistent, but you are not thinking actively. You're being foolish. Accurate thinking is one of the 17 principles of success laid out by Napoleon Hill in his book, Think and Grow Rich. Accurate thinking means thinking about things based on what you can measure, prove, and count, not based on feelings, instincts, emotions, or your personal opinions. Your personal opinions do not matter when we're thinking accurately. They matter, but they don't matter. I want you to listen to that sentence again. Let me say it again. Accurate thinking means thinking of things based on what you can measure, prove, and count, not based on your gut feelings, instincts, emotions, or opinions. Make sure you're holding yourself accountable to this standard. Most people who I talk to, most of whom are entrepreneurs and athletes, do not do this. Most people just make decisions based on however they feel, whatever their energy is in a moment, whatever direction the wind is blowing that week, if it's raining outside or not. About 97% of the people who I talk to do not measure things based on standards of, again, using the scientific method, or even something that even looks like the scientific method. They do it based on their personal method, which is whatever I feel like doing that day. It's not a good idea. This is the reason why many people have virtuous ideas and things that they want to achieve, and they're willing to work hard, and they have positive intentions, yet they don't succeed. What's missing? Is because you're not thinking and thus behaving in an accurate way. Your thinking is inaccurate, so it doesn't matter what you do. It's not going to get you to the result because you don't have a clear process of what you're doing. You notice all these pieces work together. So let's recap today's class, which is the persistence that works. So yesterday we talked about why persistence may not always be the best thing to do. Today I'm going to tell you when persistence is a good thing to do. Number 1, iterating using the scientific method. Again, have a baseline, a control, and know what you're trying to achieve. When you're clear on your goals, outcomes, measurements, and benchmarks, then it will make sense to persist. But if you don't have those in place, then you have no idea whether or not you should persist, and you probably should not. And make sure you are not, again, using your resources in places that will be wasteful to you, because you can't get a lot of those resources back, at least not easily. Number 2, measuring and counting. No eyeballing. All right, measuring and counting. So what are you measuring? What numbers are you looking at? How can you know that result A compares this way to result B and the difference between the two? All right, so make sure you are not just doing this by flying by the seat of your pants, as we say. Number 3, clarity of process. Steps that you're following need to be clearly laid out in such a way that anybody can look at it, know exactly what you're doing, who, what, why, whens, and wheres, and hows of what you're doing. And especially you need to understand that. Number 4, all this leads to accurate thinking. Our persistence without accurate thinking is better known by its common name, which is foolishness. Napoleon Hill laid out accurate thinking as one of his 17 principles of success. And if you are not thinking accurately, it's usually because you have no clear plan. There is no scientific method. You don't know what you're measuring. You don't have a baseline. You don't know where you're trying to go. And you wouldn't even know if you have reached the endpoint because you haven't decided on what the endpoint is. Don't make these mistakes. But all that said, text me, see you on my community. My number's down below in the description. Also, workonyourgameuniversity.com. That link's down below as well. If you want to work with me directly and have me as a coach. If you like what you hear on this show, imagine what it's like when I'm working with you personally on your specific issues and applying these principles, strategies, and techniques to your stuff so you can get your results 10 times faster. That's all at workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre, all